I did this to myself for that first whole year. Like, why would you waste a whole day when you know that you're doing the thing that you really love and that it's somehow mysteriously somehow starting to work out? Like, why would you waste a day?
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, onto the show with your host, Ella Barnard.
Hey boss, if you are starting on your author journey but are nervous about marketing, then I've got something special for you. I've just released a book called Start Marketing Your Book. In it, I share fundamental marketing principles and simple, actionable steps that you can take right now. For less than a cup of coffee, you could actually have everything you need to start selling more books. To buy the book, go to authorlikeaboss.com/start marketing. Hey bosses! Hey everybody! Welcome to the show. We are here today with B.C. Palmer. He lives just outside of Portland, Oregon with his husband Scott and his incredible wonder dog, Mac. He's emerging from the shady underworld of ghostwriting and category romance. B.C. is now focused on his debut urban fantasy series, Saint Moreno. He has plans for an epic fantasy space opera series and other unexpected rule-breaking series. Ooh, that sounds really exciting. So glad to have you here, BC. How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be here as well. I've been listening to the podcast. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. When people say that, I'm like, really? There's people listening?
Right? I had to say every time someone reads a book that I've written, I had the same shock.
Oh, this is awesome. People are listening,
Right?
like strangers, not just my friends.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I would love to hear a little bit more about yourself and your author journey. Like, where'd you start and how'd you get to where you are now?
Well, I started with what I guess you'd call fan fiction when I was really, really young. Like from maybe around the ages of like 10 or 11, I read The Hobbit was like the first like big fantasy book that I read that I got from a teacher when I was in 5th grade. And I liked it so much that I tried my hand at writing. And what it turned out to be was just like a regurgitation of that particular book. And it was, of course, it was terrible. It was written by a 5th grader. So I sort of like nurtured this for a little while. And when I got to be in my freshman year in high school, I had an amazing teacher, Miss Peterson. And I took her class, basically her creative writing class as an elective because I was just like, I was sort of tired of school already and that sort of thing. But she turned out to be like a crazy, like they could make a movie about her type teacher who like threw out the textbook and broke all the rules and told us all that we could chase our dreams and stuff like that. And she convinced me that I should try, that this is something that I should do. And so I tried for the next like 15 years or so. I just like wrote constantly. And then I had gone into like tech support with Netflix for a couple of years. And when they closed the center down close to us, I was like, you know what? I don't have any excuses. I've been doing this I've been writing for 15 years. I feel like I'm almost good enough that I feel like I should maybe put something out there. And that was about the time that self-publishing had, sort of exploded. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote my first couple of short romance books and very sort of tentatively and cautiously put them online on Amazon and then like looked away for a couple of months. And when I came back, it turned out that people had read my books. And so I just kept doing that. So that's what? I just kept doing it. Yeah, that's pretty much how I got into it. Pretty soon after that, I got a little bit, I wasn't super happy being in romance. I mean, I liked having my books read and things like that, but I had other stories that I wanted to tell. I always wanted to be a fantasy author. So I moved out of romance and into ghostwriting, and that exposed me to the real, like, super intricate world of self-publishing that before that, I mean, I was putting my books up online and stuff, but I didn't realize all the different, like, awesome business models that people had and things like that. I learned so much from so many authors by ghostwriting that I finally decided that it was time to jump into that genre where I really want to be. So that's how I wound my way around to where I am now.
Okay, I have a few questions from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first one is, I love one. I just want to acknowledge the throwing your book out there and then putting your head in the sand strategy. You're like, I did
no
it. Okay,
marketing,
no,
nothing. I was so afraid. I was so afraid of the reaction and the rejection that was inevitably going to come from doing that.
Yeah, and did it happen? The rejection?
No, not at all. I was kind of shocked because it was so. I'm not at all sort of like shy about this. But I started out in like what I would call like romantic erotica. Because it was hot at the time, and that's what everyone was saying. Like, you can't go wrong with this, right? So I wrote a book without really knowing what all the conventions were and what I was supposed to be kind of doing with a book. And I learned a lot later on that you can't sell a book like that. But to my surprise, that book still, I haven't published anything now in a couple of months while I've been working on the Adam Saint book, or the Saint Marina book. And it's still, to this day, this was 4 years ago, and it still is the only book that I didn't follow any rules because I didn't know there were rules, that still consistently pays every month. Like, that's the book that I make my money from every month. And it's, it is what it is. I mean, I'm happy for it. It's super interesting. But it did remind me as I got ready to write this book that, like, you don't have to be so concerned with what we think are the rules about writing books and genre and stuff. Sorry, I kind of derailed you there. I didn't.
Yeah, no. I'm like, I don't know how to go from there, because there are rules, but then there's also the matter of like being yourself and having your voice, and it's like this play with it. Yeah,
it is. It's an interplay between what's expected and what's not expected, and I guess. So I jumped into. I got almost immediately as soon as I realized this book was going to do. I was like, I need to learn how to actually do this now that I'm doing it. So I jumped into a forum, Dirty Discourse, which was a great place for me, and it still is, and it's a great community there. And started to learn all of the so when you write a book, you have to kind of do it like this, and this is what the romance readers are expecting. This is what erotica readers are expecting. This is what they'll pay and what they won't pay. All those sorts of things. Where all the good marketing lists were, and how to market on Facebook and that sort of thing. And what I mean by sort of like you don't have to necessarily stick to those rules is that every book that I've written that has defied the conventions of the genre, those are the books that have always done well for me. The books that follow the sort of more common formulas, the things that I was always told, or have always been told, are like what readers really expect, right? Like in romance, your hero and heroine, they can be a little bit angsty, but like not too angsty and not too traumatized, because if they're too traumatized, then it's just depressing. Things like that. Those are the books that for me have always sold the best. So and the ones that I kind of followed the formula and followed a lot of the advice that I got, those are the books that sold okay for like a couple of months and then fell off, and they haven't sold a copy since. So that's what I mean about, there are genre conventions and there are rules. I don't know how important they are, and it's really hard to gauge how how attached to them readers are, and whether or not they really know any better, right?
Yeah, and this is really making me think that because self-publishing magically, and we are still in early days of self-publishing. Like, like this is still early days, but because you're getting to see, like, it used to be like there were these gatekeepers who got to define what was accessible, and people only got to choose from what was accessible. And so you didn't get to go and see, like, dark romance is a thing, and they are dark, some of them, and you're like, they don't want them to be too angsty. Well, some of these dark romance, this is really angsty. But it's really popular. There is a group of people who really love that, and who will read all of it. So I think on the one side you don't have the gatekeepers, and on the other side you got the audience that they can finally be like, we get to vote with our dollar, and this is what we want. And it might not be what is been expected or conventional, or and you don't have to go into the bookstore and have everybody see what book you're picking up. You're just at home on your phone or Kindle, and you're like, I'm buying this. I'm totally anonymous.
Yes.
Because I used to, when I grew up, I would like hide my covers because they were all, bodice ripper covers. And I'd be like, I'm not reading this on the subway.
Right. Yeah.
Don't have to worry about that anymore. Yay. I wanted to ask about, you said that you went into ghostwriting and you discovered like all these different business models. Are you okay with, you don't have to talk about who you're, like, obviously not.
No,
but,
well, I can't. But
yeah, you can't. But the business models, that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah. Well, so we're seeing a lot of, we, the author community, we ghostwriters especially, but other authors, we all kind of know that it happens. We know that it's out there. But there are, you're familiar with like the model that like Harlequin Romance has had for ages and ages, where a lot of their authors are not necessarily real people. They're pen names, and other people sort of contribute to those pen names, and they basically like pay you a standard fee to write a book under whatever category. Right. And then they just pay you off, and then they take the book and they do it and they publish it and they make the money and stuff. Well, the indie model for a long time has been sort of gradually catching on to that. So now there are a lot of these really, really successful micro publishers that are like, it's an indie author who started out in some category of romance. They got themselves to the point where they've got a backlog of, these are huge catalogs that I'm sure you've heard of before, where people have 40 or 50 books that they've written in just like 7 or 8 years. They write them really, really fast.
Yeah.
And the next sort of step from there, when you need to grow, is to, you can only write so many, you're only physically capable of writing so many words, right?
Yep.
So they'll set up these like tiny micro publisher companies where they'll have 5 or 6 pen names. And one of the ones that I worked for, they're like a full on, it went from one author with his pen name to now he's got like 6 pen names, and he's got the whole, it's like running in a publishing house. He's got editors. He's got the people who write the plots. He's got people who write the books, but they're ghostwriters because their names are not on the books, of course. And then has like a whole marketing team and that sort of thing. And has really, it really looks very much like what a big publisher looks like when they're still very small. So I foresee in the next 10, 15 years, as some of these places expand and grow, because this particular publisher has branched out. They're not just in romance anymore. They're doing thrillers. They're doing young adult science fiction. They're doing young adult fantasy, that sort of thing. So they're really expanding their the base of what they actually produce. And that's several steps away from just becoming like a small publisher and then a big publisher. I think that we're going to see not just independent publishers, but we're going to see a lot more of that kind of publishing expanding over the next decade or so, as these really successful indie authors start finding ways to build their business. And I think that's amazing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So is that what you like? That's one business model. Is that what you think? Is that?
Yeah. So other business models are more like using the ghostwriters to maintain various series, right? So you'll have a couple of authors who like they get a series started. I worked with the woman who wrote Cozy Mysteries, Witch Cozies, and that was which is one of the like most fun that I've had on a project to date. And she wrote the first book, and she has a couple of other series in the mystery category, but she also has like a couple of romance lines, and that's sort of what she does. She writes the first book in the series. She sees how it does. And if it does well, then she starts looking for a ghostwriter to start to take over the series, and she'll provide she writes the plots and that sort of thing. Some authors are really collaborative about that with their ghostwriters, and some are not. Some ghostwriters just want to write the book, but don't want to deal with the plot. I'm a very collaborative writer. I'm a micromanager, just in general. So I'm particularly collaborative with the authors that I work with. But it's all about like finding out like, is this concept for a series, is this going to work? If it does, great. Invest in a good ghostwriter, hand them the plot, let them take over the series while I go on and work on the next idea, the next concept to get another series started. And doing that, one independent author can have their favorite series that they really like to write. And I've never worked with an indie author I've never ghostwritten for an indie author who didn't have their baby that they want to keep working on. so they've got that series, and then the rest are sort of foisted off to ghostwriters and stuff. And I don't think, I mean, I think it's a great model, and it certainly, it sort of keeps ghostwriters paid.
Yeah.
But it's a great way to do it, especially because if that first book is really successful and really excites readers, then, you can't maintain 5 series at a time and with any kind of, it's just not possible for a person to do that, right? So it's a good, sensible model, and it's and it produces a lot of books.
I didn't I'm thinking about that because one of the people that I talked to was Josh Hayes, and it sounds very, very similar because he's not ghostwriting, but he's co-writing with Richard Fox, and he went through his process, and it sounds almost identical. Yeah. Richard Fox is like, hey, do you want to co-write with me on this? So it has Richard Fox's names. I'm sure that on these series, like Richard Fox is in big, and it's like, yeah, Josh Hayes.
Right. James Patterson has been doing that for ages.
Yeah. And so,
same thing.
But in the indie authors, like they can. So now Josh Hayes has his own series and his series with Richard Fox, and it lifts them both up.
Yes.
As indie authors. And I don't know if this is my personal thing, or I don't know that much about ghostwriting, but I like the idea of everybody getting lifted up. I like that a lot. So that just might be me personally, but it's a very similar thing because he can have 5 or 6 series going because he has these other authors working on.
Yeah, for sure.
The stuff. Yeah. How exciting.
And I love that. It speaks to there's such an attitude of teamwork amongst indie authors that I love. I've had the opportunity to kind of speak with, and I would not say mentor under, but I've spoken with a lot of traditional authors and that sort of thing. And there is a lot less teamwork in the trade world, I feel like, than there is in the indie author community. And maybe that's because we don't, as a whole, our industry doesn't have access to a lot of the same resources that they do. We don't always have the same presence in the market and that sort of thing. Not the big loud billboard presence, right? Mm-hmm. So instead, it feels like we really have to rely on each other and really have to work together, trading resources and helping lift other authors up. And that it's largely, other than the creative freedom, it's largely that sense of community is the reason that I'm not sure I'll ever necessarily want to go in a traditional direction. If I had the opportunity, I'm not sure I would want to, because I love the indie author community so much.
Me too.
For all of the ways that we all help each other out, and it's so casual, and there's not competition, and very few people I have found are they're not full of themselves, right? We all started scraping at the bottom, hauling our way up. So that kind of sense of community is just such a beautiful thing to see in a really remarkable industry. I don't know that you see that in almost any other industry outside of maybe the nonprofit sector or something. Yeah,
I've moved around quite a bit, you guys, and I am agreeing with you 100%, BC, because I get teared up on the regular by the people, and I'm like, I am so fortunate. We are so freaking fortunate to be in this industry where I have just barely started a podcast, and I'm talking to Chris Fox.
I know.
I'm like, wow, these people are so generous, and because of it, I'm thinking about, I want to make something. I don't know what I want to create, but I'm letting you guys, this is the first exclusive early access right way at the beginning about celebrating that and doing something deliberately to keep it that way. Because I know some of the indie authors I talk to, after a little bit of time, they get a little bit they're still generous, but they're a little bit jaded, a little bit cynical, because they've seen stuff. And I want to make sure, because this is such a new industry, I really want to make sure it stays there is a good, strong power, we're generous, we support each other. We're not I want to keep that in this industry, and I don't know. Anyways, so early access, you guys, I don't know how it's going to be. That might be a conference, might be some kind of convention, something, but it's going to be something.
Right?
Because it's too special to it's too special to not acknowledge and celebrate and feed. So, okay.
For sure.
Sorry, tangent.
No, that's great. I mean, and it sounds so exciting. So when that happens, you let me know.
I will. Okay, so now you're not ghostwriting, but how long were you ghostwriting, and then how many years, and now how many books were you getting done, and what are you doing now? Like, give us some details.
I started out ghostwriting, and in my first like maybe 3 months or so, I had booked out the year, and I discovered that I have like very little sense of time and the amount of time that it takes to get things done. So I was just like, I'd written a handful of romance books for myself at that point, and they were doing pretty good, and I had produced them fairly quickly. So I thought to myself, like, I can produce a romance book in like a month at the outside. Sometimes I've done it in as little as a few days. And I was like, if I ghostwrite, like there's no stress about whether or not the book is going to sell, right? I just write it, give it back to the author. It's their deal to sell it. I get paid and move on to the next project. It sounded great. And I booked out for my first year. I started in May, so it wasn't the full year, but I got booked out through December before I cut it off. And I ended up writing 13 books that first year, like full-length novels. And I did not have a nervous breakdown, but
it was close.
But I was very close, and I learned a whole lot about. I mean, I feel like that experience for me, and the 2 years after that, because I ghost wrote for about 3 years altogether. That whole experience, I feel like it was like training to move on and start writing my own stuff and do it relatively quickly, and to be smart about it, and to learn from all of these authors who, frankly, are authors who could afford to hire a ghostwriter, right? That's a key thing about those people, is that they have the money to put where their mouth is. You know that they're at least moderately successful, because if not, they couldn't afford to put, $1,500 down on a full-length romance novel. So watching how they do their marketing and stuff like that, that was all training. Writing the books and learning to write them fast and follow a plot, follow a guide. Learning to make the time during the day and not do things like, we all work from home, indie authors for the most part, most of us, and it's super easy to feel like, well, I got a little bit of work done today, right? Like,
nap time.
Like Neil Gaiman says he only writes sometimes 200 or 300 words a day. So if I get like 2,000 words, well then, I obviously deserve a Netflix binge. So that whole process gave me the discipline, and I've now brought other writers, other like budding writers who want to write books. I've got 2 of them who I've brought into the ghostwriting world specifically because I think it is such excellent training for being an author. I mean, you still have to do good for your author, right? You got to have some grasp of the ability to write a book. But as far as like sticking to deadlines, they're not your deadlines. You can't just put off publication, right? You have to produce this book for someone else who does have a hard deadline. Having that kind of pressure on you is great training for putting the pressure on yourself to produce your own books. And then also being able to work in a variety of genres without really committing yourself to
a brand.
If you're going to be a brand, yeah, exactly. If you're going to be a mystery writer, well, then you've got to, it's not enough to just write one mystery book under a pen name. And of course, it's much more difficult to manage a vast multi-genre single pen name where you've got romance and mystery and everything else. Like, readers never know what they're going to expect from one of your books, right? So it gets harder to do it that way. So you get to like dip your toes in all of these different ponds and really find out what it is that you really want to write. Like, I was always super excited about high fantasy and science fiction. It was after I wrote the Witch Cozy series for this other author that I realized how much I really enjoyed urban fantasy. I'd always enjoyed reading it, but it hadn't really occurred to me to write in urban fantasy until after I did that series. And I was like, oh my God, I have to do more of this. So I think that it's a great place for new writers to train is as a ghostwriter.
I love that.
And it was for me.
I love that because I know a lot because what you're saying is so true. Like, we've talked about this, you guys, where when you have a brand, when you have a pen name, you need to be consistent with what you're producing so that your people, your readers, or your fans and followers know what they're going to get. And if you want to write in multiple genres, let's be honest, most authors do. They're like, I have a mystery idea. I have they have all these ideas. Yep. But you would have to create a new brand for each one, and maintaining that is a lot harder.
Yes. And it cuts down your production for all of those different brands.
Yes.
So
how fun would it be to have your own brand that you created and then play as a ghostwriter with these other ones until you have enough time and resources and money to become your own fountainhead.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the deadlines and how you are getting how you were or are at this point in your life getting these words done, and the benefit of, because I think a lot of people don't realize like the clear, like we know the benefit of deadlines, but there's a level of accountability. I guess this is just something I'm wanting to touch on generally, not specifically with you, but just like
you've been talking to my editor, I can tell.
So, and then your day-to-day of getting the stuff done.
Yeah. Well, I'm super fortunate to between the plotting and consulting and ghostwriting, more the plotting and consulting now. I haven't ghostwritten anything for a while, but between that and the ongoing like very gentle marketing push for my like romance and erotica catalogs and things like that, I'm very fortunate to be able to do it full time. So I don't have like a day job or anything like that. And for me, it's just about making sure that I feel like I'm going to work every day. So if I had a regular office job, I would get up at 6 or 7 in the morning. I would, take a shower and groom and have my coffee and eat breakfast and get dressed in something more that's, yes, get going.
I know what you mean. I work from home too. So I'm like,
yeah. So when I do have days where I feel particularly lazy and I can wake up and I have the option, to not shower for the day. I have the option to just be in my pajamas all day. And when I do that, I get really, really lazy. And it's easy to just stay sort of snuggle up all day, right? So for me, what I have to do is get up, get dressed, actually go to work. I don't work at like an office. Me and my husband, we live in like a studio apartment. So I work on the couch on the television where I have a computer hooked up. So there's that extra incentive to like, you're already on the couch. You could just watch one episode of something on Netflix. So there's a degree of just like
yourself. You're like, this is my
So there's a degree of just like forcing yourself to be in work mode. And I do that from 9 to 5, 5 days a week. If my husband's working over the weekend and I don't have anything that I want to do over the weekend, I work the weekends as well. Of course, if we don't have plans in the evening and I don't have anything else to do, then I sometimes work after 5. But 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, those are my work hours where all I do is work. And for me, getting words down is just a matter of setting aside 45 minutes out of every hour. I split that in 2, so I do like 20 minutes on one side, 20 minutes on the other with a 5-minute break in between. And though that sequence, 25-20, is dedicated entirely to writing something. And then that kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off of each hour because I know that I've got this 15-minute sort of like leeway window at the end of the hour where I can like, if I'm feeling it, I can keep writing. And if I'm not, then it's that I give myself permission to not force myself to do it. As long as I'm still writing in those 2 20-minute blocks in each hour. And for me, that gives a sense of pressure because like every hour there needs to be words written. But it also at the same time sort of gives me the sense like I'm not flagellating myself, right?
Yeah.
For the entire hour and forcing myself to do something for a straight 8 hours. If for a minute I get distracted or something like that. So I think it's good to have a good balance of if you're going to do it full time, especially, or even more especially if you have to carve out a few hours a day because that's all you have. It's important to balance the discipline with the sort of permission, right? The permission to do self-care, the permission to like go have a snack or something like that. Go to the bathroom, that sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, it's good. It's not healthy. And I think, and there are so many studies about this in traditional jobs now that it's not healthy to be on for 8 hours straight with no break. Like you really need to give yourself a little bit of each hour where it's okay to slip, right?
Yeah.
And then that keeps you from slipping for the rest of that hour.
Yeah. And I think a lot of actually, even just for your health and your body, I love that you mentioned self-care. I think that's really, really important
it's so
aspect.
important.
Yeah. It's self-care, you guys, is like fuel for your creativity, I think. And when you don't take care of it, you don't you don't have as much creativity. No. Like I've since I've been working from home and sitting a lot, my chiropractor was like, you should lay down on the ground for like 10 minutes for every hour that you're sitting like at a desk. Like just lay and let your shoulders relax back. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. Because like my wrist is hurting and I'm not, like, so awesome. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. So what are you doing? You mentioned softly marketing this new book that's coming out, and I want to talk about that a little bit. What are you doing to kind of softly?
So to motivate myself to get this book written at last, and I'm on. It's unusual for me. I'm on like draft 8 or 9, and it's nearly done. But I motivated myself by going ahead and putting it up for pre-order on Amazon.
Deadlines
at 90 days, to make sure that there's a deadline, and every like that tab is permanently open on my computer, so that anytime that I'm kind of feeling like I don't know if I want to do this right now, I just like go over to the pre-order page inside the KDP dashboard where it has a countdown, and it counts down by the second, minute, day, everything, and you can see the words dripping away that way. So that's very, very motivating. So as soon as I put it up for pre-order and started working on getting everything put together for it, the first thing I did is went and joined a couple of urban fantasy fan groups on Facebook. And there is an instinct for authors, and it was my instinct as well when I first got into romance. There's an instinct to get on to whatever group people are paying attention to and like post the link to your buy page and tell people like, hey, I'm writing this new book. I think you should go and read it. That never worked for me. Like I never got much of a response. No one ever there was no social engagement. Nobody really liked the posts and that sort of thing, or clicked through or any of that stuff. And I know that does happen with some people, but for me, it never did. So this time what I did is I went to those fan groups. And I already love reading urban fantasy. I'm already really familiar with the big names in the genre. I know a lot of the good like indie books and a lot of the good trade books. So I got in there and I just sort of like was a fan. I just went in as a fan to talk to these people like a fan, as a fan, because I am. And what I found was that there are always moments in those conversations when people want to know about another book. They want to know about something new, especially if they're talking about the things that they either really like in a particular type of book. Can I find more of these types of books, or something that they really don't like? So I ended up involved in a lot of conversations about things like diversity in urban fantasy books, where like pretty much all other fiction books in the Western world, pretty much everyone is they're very white.
Yes.
And in urban fantasy, up until only a handful of years ago, before self-publishing, urban fantasy especially was mostly white males, mostly straight white males. So you end up getting into conversations like that. And when you see a conversation happening where someone is basically telling you, I'm looking for books like yours, then they are so much more receptive when you go in and you say like, well, it so happens I'm writing a book. You should check it out. This is where you could, this is where it's up for pre-order. Or if you don't want to pre-order it, join my Facebook page or join my newsletter, and I'll tell you when it comes out, or I'll come back here and tell everyone. And the reception for that was very positive and immediate. I had an excellent cover by Gene Malika. They're brilliant, brilliant people. But before I had that cover, I had my own sort of mock-up temporary cover that I put up just because, you can't put a pre-order up on Facebook without a cover. And before the cover was super fancy, just from those conversations alone, I got about 30 or 40 pre-orders for this book, with a new series, new pen name, just from hanging out with fans and just kind of talking about it. So that's what I mean by soft marketing. It's not a hard market push. I'm not putting money into it. I'm just putting a little bit of social time into it just to talk to these people and to really just enjoy their company and try and hopefully help them enjoy my company so that they will enjoy the company of my books.
I love it.
Yeah. it worked so wonderfully. Like they got to be they became really interested in the process. So as Gene Mollica was working on the cover, he wanted me to select from the number of, like, they did a custom photo shoot for it and everything. So I went to the group and was like, hey, I'm trying to decide what photo I want on the final cover for this series. Like, what do you guys think of some of these photos? And the engagement was immediate and extensive, right? Everybody had opinions and even though I had already pretty much made up my mind which one, and it was the same photo that they decided they liked as well. The important thing is that it really made them feel engaged and excited. And now they want to see what the final product looks like. And then they have to know if it was all worth it. So they go out and they, hopefully buy the book.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the best, I don't remember where I read this, but I've been reading about business and entrepreneurship for a very long time, but it was like the best, I think it was something around Tesla, because they were like, you can email us, and they did surveys to find out what people wanted most in a car. And because they did the surveys about it, people felt like they had partial ownership. Like, I am part of the creator of this vehicle, because and because you feel like you have partial ownership, and I'm not to say like you don't have to do this. You can know this while you're being a genuine.
Yeah, you can be genuine about it, especially if it's somewhere, especially if it's on a subject that you're really passionate about already. Like, there's just no reason not to go in and just let yourself be a fan as well as a creator.
Yes, like, because I don't mean like you don't have to manipulate people. You can be genuine, be authentic, and have integrity, but with the knowledge that, like, hey, these people want a book. They want this book. So don't keep it from them.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Oh man, we were talking about all the stuff that I love to talk about, and that's why I'm talking more. So I'm going to stop.
I completely sympathize. I can talk for hours about books.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, how do you stay motivated?
Well, there is the artistic motivation. I have a need. I'm one of those, like, not everybody is like this, and it's fine to not be like this. I'm one of those people, like, if I wasn't writing, whether I'm getting paid or not, if I wasn't doing that, I would wither and die like a flower in the desert or something poetic like that. Okay. Like, it's what gives me life. And I'm so happy to be able to be doing that. That one part of the motivation is certainly that if I stop doing it, it'll dry up, and then I won't be doing what I love. And so that is a big motivation. And then the other thing is just that, I'm fortunate to have an incredibly supportive partner, my husband, Scott. And it's really important to me to sort of like make him proud of me, because he's one of these like ridiculous, like nationally and internationally recognized theater directors who's like in magazines and things. I mean, he's not famous. If you're in the theater world, you've heard of him, but he's not like world famous or anything. But he's always got some sort of project, some message, and people listen. And I'm so unbelievably proud of him all the time. And so when I have to sit down and I think to myself, what am I going to do with my day? One of the things that does cross my mind is like, I need to write this book so I can make my husband proud. And for me, that's where a lot of my motivation comes from. Is like, I've got to do this. I've got to be a good equal partner. I have to make of course he's proud of me already, but I have to make that worth something,
I do know.
And, it's just, and everybody has something different. I don't think that whatever you can find, right? Whatever motivation you have, as long as you take the time to like figure out what your motivation is and then keep reminding yourself of it when things get hard, when you're stuck on a book, when you aren't sure if you're marketing right, when you're not sure you want to put in the effort to market right, because sometimes it's really hard when you're when you just start to worry about like, are my books making enough money? Are they selling enough? Am I going to have to, take on another ghostwriting project because this, project isn't paying, that sort of thing. It's really important to have that motivation in your back pocket, even if it's not always at the forefront of your mind. Find something that is deeply motivating and just whip it out whenever you need it and just use it to remind yourself, like, you're doing this for a reason. You're not just shouting into a void. Like, you've got a goal, and that goal, it stays important.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of places they call that your why. Like why. Why are you doing this? and having a powerful one makes a big difference. Like, for mine, my husband and I, he's 16 years older than I am, and we didn't meet until not that long ago. And so
That's the same. Me and Scott are the same distance apart. Exactly.
See, and
hilarious.
I know that's because it's not like a typical.
He's older than me. I'm not dating like a 15-year-old.
Right. And my husband's older than I am too, but we didn't meet each other until not until later in his life, obviously, than mine, but later. And I'm like, I don't want us to spend our whole lives working so hard and not being able to enjoy each other. Like, so like, I have this why of like, he's supporting me right now while I start my business and write these books, whatever it is, what you're doing. He's supporting me right now. And I want to make that not take advantage, but make
it worth it.
Make it worth it. Yeah. And honor his support so that we can have the life that we want, where we aren't just working so hard, but we get to enjoy each other. And that's mine. That's mine, you guys. It's like when I'm like, but I don't want to, I'm like, he is working his tail off for me to be able to do this.
Right.
And to write, because writing, you don't see it takes time. It's not an instant, $10,000 a month. It's definitely doable, but it takes a few years.
It takes time. You have to go slowly, proceed safely, and
So anyways, I love it. Can you tell us about an obstacle or challenge that you faced in your journey and how you worked through it?
This is going to sound super. I'm sure how to come off. I have been unbelievably. I've been very fortunate. There have been very few obstacles to my career, and I don't know why that is exactly. Because I've been navigating a lot of it completely blind. The main obstacle for me was just developing the discipline to do it, and to sit down and do it every day. Because I'm not a disciplined person by nature. I'm not organized. Not without a great deal of force involved. Like, I mean, I had to whip myself into shape, and I had to do that every day for that first year. Especially, it started when I started the ghostwriting. There were no excuses to make. The people who paid me weren't going to take excuses. They're not, there's nothing that I can say to them that would explain why their book is now late because I didn't get my shit in order, my stuff in order. So for me, it was just that. It was just the discipline to sit down. Like, I've never had any really bad reviews for any of the stuff that I've written. Not unless it was just related directly to the subject matter. I get a handful of those, like, ew, gross, sort of things. Yeah. But most of the books that I've written they've at least paid back what I invested in them, if not more. So the main thing was just like, once I saw that happening. And then I had those days where I was just like, I'm just going to look at cat videos all day, which happened frequently early on. It just became a point where it's such a wasted opportunity. Like, why? I did this to myself for that first whole year. Like, why would you waste a whole day when you know that you're doing the thing that you really love and that it's somehow mysteriously starting to work out? Like, why would you waste a day? And so I had to really whip myself constantly and berate myself. And my family's Irish, so we're super there. Guilt came with sort of the package for us. So I had to guilt myself into it, and it took that solid year of not being able to make excuses to really whip me into shape. And now I produce more consistently, and I feel like I have a daily schedule. And even though it's very rigid a lot of the time, it's so much less stressful. I have a great deal less stress about all of it working to a rigid schedule than I did when I was sort of like, wake up and write when I feel like it, and do a couple of 1,000 words and then watch cat videos all day.
Yeah. What do you think? And I'm only asking this because I think a lot of people have that, like, they're like, this is what I always wanted to do. like this is what I love. It's viable now. Like, that's the, like, this is a viable, realistic option for me. What do you think is that resistance that shows up?
I think that we're all a little bit afraid of, if not a little bit, a lot. We're all afraid of rejection. We're all afraid of failure. We all see these luminaries in various fields, and that's true whether you want to be an athlete or a writer or an engineer or a playwright, whatever it is that you want to do. There's a group of elites in that field who are just incredible, and that's all that we get to see. We don't get to see the process that made them that way. We don't get to see the struggle that they went through. We don't get to see the fact that they started out when they were 5 years old and have been doing it their entire lives, and it's been the focus. All we see is the success, right? And so it's easy, I think, for people to say, I really want to do this, and then look at the people who are doing really well and think, I'm not good at this right away. I didn't immediately become successful. I didn't immediately write the next great American novel, whatever. And to sort of feel like there's just no point. Like, I'm never going to be that good. But those people struggled and spent their whole lives getting to that point, right? They worked really, really hard. And if you can't see the whole process of working so hard, it's easy to feel like you're just not good enough. And I think that holds a lot of people back. It held me back for 15 years. I never submitted. I wrote 4 full-length fantasy novels before I ever published my first steamy romance, and I never submitted them to anyone. I never worked with an editor, went to a critique group or something like that, because I was so afraid that it's just not good, and that can hold you back, and it shouldn't, because nobody is good at first, right? Like, we all have to learn. Mm-hmm. We have to learn to walk. We have to learn to crawl, for that matter. Like, everyone sucks at everything when they first start out.
Yes.
And that's not not an excuse for not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it can take time.
It does.
It can take time.
It takes patience.
Yeah.
I think that those sorts of things, they sort of, you either, the test is not whether or not you can do something. It's whether or not you can bring yourself to sustain the effort for some amount of time. And if you can get past that initial growth period, and if you can sort of set your ego aside and feel like you don't have to be good at it right away, it is hard. If you really, really want it, then the effort of doing all that is not easier, but it doesn't kill you. And if it's something that you kind of like, you're not really sure if you want it or not, it sounds like a nice idea, you really want the outcome more than the process of getting there, then a lot of the time I think that those people, which is perfectly fine, we don't all have to be passionate about the same things, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that I personally don't think that there's a requirement, being human, that you do have some sort of overriding passion. It's fine to just be alive and to just enjoy life and your family and things like that. Not everyone needs a purpose, like a giant purpose for a living, to drive them forward, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think that people should feel bad about not having as much passion as the guy over there who's, bleeding onto a page, right? It's your own journey. You just have to decide whether or not it's worth it to endure the period of time where you're not going to be good at it. And if you can get through that, those are the people who may well go on to be really successful at whatever they do. Yeah. You just have to like, grin and bear it and do your best and be willing to fall down and get yourself a box of Band-Aids.
I love it. Because I think that speaks to what we were talking about earlier, which is the importance of that why. Because the why helps. Is what gets you through is this going to be good enough? Like, it's like, well, I can either give up because it won't be good enough, but then you look at that, you pull out your why, and you're like, but if I give up, that means giving up this thing that's important to me. Yeah. So I think that speaks to the importance of the why. And I also, that every author does have this resistance. It's not. It is not like, especially when they're first beginning, like there is real resistance to that. Even just believing, like, is this possible? There can be real resistance. And is this?
We've been taught for such a long time that it's not.
Yeah. The only special people, and maybe you aren't special. Like it can show up in different ways for different people, but it usually comes back down to good enough. Or not good enough.
Right.
But yeah. Okay. So what advice can you give to other authors? What's your best advice for other people who want to make this their full-time life?
Well, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. I think that you have to be patient, and you have to be willing to set your ego aside and be okay at first with not being very good. And it's not that I'm not saying that new authors are not good at what they're doing or anything like that. I just mean that if you set yourself up with this expectation, I'm going to do this, it's going to be great, I'm going to be super successful, very much the positive thinking things. There's a place for the positive thinking, but I see a lot of people flounder because they set themselves up with this giant expectation and then they want to get there really fast. And when they don't get there fast, they give up. So I think it's important to be really patient, to take the time to connect to the community. Don't work in isolation. There is such a huge, super helpful, wonderful, inviting indie author community out there. There's no excuse for trying to do it all on your own and trying to become successful in a vacuum. Not only do I think you probably can't do it, but there's no reason. And it feels so much better to be connected to a community. So be patient, connect to that community, be open-minded and learn, and then just be willing to do the work, follow the advice of authors who are doing, who are more successful. Like take advantage of the time that you have. In a way, I feel like that early part of a writer's career is such a struggle for pretty much all of us, but it's also such an invaluable time because it's the time. This is going to sound silly maybe, but it's the time before you knew anything, and you were so eager to learn. And a lot of authors who have been in the business for a while start to lose that eagerness. And when they do lose that eagerness and they lose that openness and connection, you kind of see some of them sort of slip into obscurity. So that's my advice. Take advantage of this wonderful community. Reach out and let yourself be lifted up by this community a little bit. Take advice, take feedback, take criticism. Do it all with grace and patience. And then when the time comes, turn around and look at the people who are coming into the industry and help them lift them up as well, because we're all like, this is a tide that really does float, that really does lift all boats, right? Yeah. It's not a competition. We don't have to fight. We don't have to fight amongst ourselves to get readers. There are, between just the US and the UK, there's, very close to like 750 million English-speaking readers, and that's just English-speaking readers in the Western world, right? Mm-hmm. Not to say nothing of English speakers everywhere else, and then not to mention people who are, get their work translated in different languages. There are so many readers out there that everyone has an audience. You just have to find it, and you don't have to fight for it. You don't have to fight other authors for it.
I love that so much. Thank you, because. I don't know how old you are, but you don't have to tell me, but do you remember like, okay, so then probably you do remember like just before Amazon and self-publishing and all the, just before it was like reading is dying. Nobody's reading anymore. Like there was it was like the dark times before the climax.
Yeah, it really was.
Because it was like, nobody's going to read anymore. And now, okay, go ahead. To think that.
Yeah, to think that was even a consideration, like it spoke to an industry that so desperately needed to change. Mm-hmm. It already needed to transform into something into closer to what it is now. It already needed to change into something closer to what it is now. And to think that we were at all worried that people wouldn't want to read books, because I do remember hearing that for a long time growing up from older people, like young kids these days don't read, that sort of thing. Like it's laughable at this point. Now that so many books are there's so much access to all these new stories that, like with the dark romance stuff, stories that weren't really allowed because nobody wanted to take a chance on them. Now, like every genre has become so much more diverse that of course people want to come back to read stories. Like of course people are continue to read. Because now it's like the internet itself. There's an endless variety out there now, whereas there really wasn't before. Because
well, and it took,
you gotta make sure it's going to sell.
Yeah, this is making me think of another lady I interviewed, and I don't know that it's come out yet, but she, but it will have by the time this comes out. Sorry, but she was like, the traditional industry takes 2 years from. It's like a 2-year process. And I'm thinking about how with the self-publishing and with the speed that people are producing their work, you can really make on-topic books, fiction books too. I mean, I'm not talking about like just, like nonfiction following the news, etc. I'm talking you can be like, hey, I think there's going to be an audience for this, and make it. Within a few months and produce it and find that audience and notice, hey, there's people asking for a lot of LGBT romances. I'm going to make some. Or there's, like you can, I have a lady in the academy. She's writing a book about a transgender kid. And I'm like, this isn't a big audience like right now, but it's going to be. You should absolutely find those people.
One of the things that we do, it's questions like that, like what's the audience for this book? The fact of the matter is, we don't know how big the audience is for a book like that, and there's a lot of books like that where there's just no way to know, because no one has ever been allowed to write a book for those people, right? For that audience. And now that we can do that, we can find audiences that nobody even knew existed. And I mean, it's like striking a new vein of, I mean, not that it's all just about money, but it's like striking a new vein of gold in your backyard, where people have been taking for 100 years or however long traditional publishing's been around. Like, they never bothered to tap those audiences before, and now somebody like this lady can just can write a book to that audience, find out how big they are. We may find out that audience is huge. Well, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of insatiable readers who are so happy to find themselves represented.
Yes.
But it was never enough for the traditional industry.
Yeah, so. I think it's going to be magical and I think it is magical because you're talking about, finding gold, and that's on the author side. But for the readers who have been looking for a book like that, it's gold as well.
Yeah,
like they're
absolutely.
like, I've been looking for a book like this for years, and here it is. I finally get to read it.
Right.
I love it so much. Anyways, we're like fangirling over
the beautiful thing.
I know, it's beautiful, you guys. We're so fortunate. This is a beautiful time to be a writer. It just really, really is. Because the next step is you can go onto Facebook and find those people. It's not like you can't find them. You can go and look around and be like, hey, this is the kind of...
I'm looking for you. I wrote this book for you.
Yeah. And they're like, great. I've been waiting for your book.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us about your latest book or your newest book, this urban fantasy? This is the one we want to know about. So
yeah, so it's the St. Marino series. The first book, New Shoes, is sort of starts the whole thing out. It's a urban fantasy apocalyptic tale about a very antisocial detective and her companion, an alcoholic sorcerer with a possession problem, trying to stop the end of the world from happening without killing each other in the process. It's a lot of high drama. It's action packed. It's super snarky. It reflects my own sort of. I don't take a lot of things seriously, and this book makes light of some really terrible things. So it sort of reflects my own sense of humor, and it features. One of the main things going into writing this book that was really important to me is that growing up, there weren't a lot of books that represented me, right, as a gay kid. So the main character in this book is a gay man, and his companion is a black woman working as a homicide detective in Portland. And I have just been shocked at how excited some of the urban fantasy fans are about that, because for me it was just like, I want to put two people together and dash them against sharp rocks and watch them suffer for $15 because as an author I'm certainly masochistic, but I was so excited and pleased and a little bit surprised how important it turned out to be to some of these fans of the urban fantasy genre to see just a little bit of diversity in their books. And I almost sort of like forgot what it was like to be a teenager, right? And to not have that. So,
oh, yay!
Yeah.
Exciting.
So there's that.
Okay.
It promises to be a really fun series. There's a lot of mythology that's been reinterpreted. Everything from old Sumerian creation myths to the Book of Revelation. Everything is up for grabs to be twisted and turned inside out in unexpected ways. I'm excited.
Awesome. Okay, and so it's called New Shoes, and it's part of the Saint Marino series. Okay, and this is BC Palmer. Where can people find you?
I'm on Facebook, the BC Palmer. I'm on Twitter, BC Palmer Fiction. I'm on Amazon. I've got an author page that can be followed. I've got a website, bcpalmer.com, where there's a newsletter. Everywhere. You can find me anywhere. You won't be able to avoid me if you connect to any of the urban fantasy groups on Facebook. You'll eventually run into me somewhere.
Awesome. Okay, so you guys, I am excited for you. I am really excited to see how everything works out for you.
Me as well.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
I thank you so much for having me on here. After hearing your interviews with Chris Fox and some of these other great big giant authors, I mean, honestly, I'm shocked and humbled to be here. So thank you so much for having me on.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yes, I am. I'm like fake, acting really stuck up right here, right now. Yeah. You know me. I'm so sophisticated. Anyways, yes, and thank you everybody here who is taking the time to listen. We really, really appreciate you being here. Hugs and happy authoring here at Author Like a Boss. Hey, boss, you made it to the end of the episode. You're the best. Because of that, I'm going to give you a special invitation to find out more about the Author Boss Academy, where I and a bunch of really awesome authors hang out, have fun, and get stuff done. If you end up joining, tell me the secret word and you'll get a special bonus. Find out more about the Academy at authorlikeaboss.com/academy. The secret word is nipples. Hugs and happy authoring. I hope to see you soon.
If you love the Author Like a Boss podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. Until next time.